next film we're going to review is Minari, directed by Isaac Chung. And Mark, do you want to give us a little bit of an intro to that film?
Sure thing. So, as we mentioned, it's the Isaac Chung's film Minari. It's about a family, the Yees, who move from California, where Jacob, who's played by Stephen Yeun, and Monica, who's played by Han Ye-ri, work in sort of chick sexing factories, and they move out from California, where arguments tell us that they have been having discussions about money because they need to send money back to Korea, from which they've emigrated, and their children who are born in America, they come with them. They are little David, who's played by Alan Kim, and Anne as well, who's played by No Kate Cho. So they move to Arkansas, and it's part of Jacob's vision for their life there that he will take over this huge plot of land and farm Korean vegetables, and he puts all of his energy into this task, leaving somewhat of a gap between him and Monica, and the kids do their thing up until the arrival of their grandmother, who causes a bit of friction between husband and wife, and David doesn't really get on with her either. He sees her as not a real grandma because she doesn't bake cookies. She's called Sunya, and she's played by Yoon Ye-jung. There's also a neighbor character who kind of gravitates towards the family and starts helping out in the land, who's called Paul, but he's played by Will Patton, and he's a Christian mystic, I think you'd say. He speaks in tongues on occasion, and he's very effusive, but he was also a Korean War vet, so he sees that as a connection between him and the Yees. I'll leave off on exactly what I think about the film until we all get a word in. So, Steph, what do you think about Minari?
I really like Minari quite a lot. I think it's refreshing to see a film about sort of not so much migration, since I think when we talk about jumping country to country, but going up from to Arkansas to almost build a new life. Kind of when we see these films, it's always very much centered around the American dream and how the American dream is an illusion, and how it's never going to hold up to the. Sorry. I loved Minari. I think that it's really nice to have one of these films that, when we're talking about that kind of doesn't go straight into the American dream. We think when you have something about people fleeing towards, in this film in particular, going to Arkansas to gain a more prosperous life, to find something that makes them feel kind of purposeful in the grounds that they live upon. And it's one of those things that, for once, we don't have the whole, is the American dream an illusion? Is it all letting us down? Because we have that's the kind of narrative that we expect from these films, and this one focuses much more on the family at the core of it, and what it means to kind of take these roots from from Korea into America, and how it's difficult to kind of make your mark on a new location, and how you can contribute to it. And I think you see that a lot in the family dynamics between the husband and the wife, and there are two separate visions for what they want out of this move, and especially what David and the influence of the grandmother kind of alters that for him, and how that becomes a big conflict in the centre and continues to meander through almost turbulent waves in the way that they digest this part of their lives and things. I definitely would say that it's definitely a film that is a different way to explore this narrative that we've seen in so many films before. What did you think of the film, Jim?
So yeah, this is a film I liked a lot. It does meander at points, I think, is really my only criticism of it. There are a few points where the rural Arkansas backdrop and kind of the sun and wandering through the fields and kind of the very emotive score. There are a couple of moments where I think it maybe meanders a little bit, if I'm being honest. However, by and large, I found it a very engaging and, for me, refreshing film. Now, part of that is because we're dealing with a family where we've got Korean-born parents who have moved to America, and then we've got kids who, converse in Korean but are American. They were born in America. They have no real experience of Korea. And a lot of the cultural clashes that come up in this film, they are refreshingly, for me, I think, they're not with the Arkansas residents of the 1980s, because that would be a reasonably easy and perhaps more acidic route to go with this, but it's actually far more to do with the culture clashes within the family itself. In particular the kids, in particular David, played by Alan Kim, the youngest, the little boy. He has so many scenes with his grandmother, Sunya, played by Yoo Young Yoon, where it's actually really, really very funny. In a sort of quite hurtful way at times. And I think the way it plays the generational differences between, say, Sunya and her daughter Monica, the clashes kind of culturally even between Monica and her husband Jacob, the cultural clashes between the kids and the grandmother, the kids and the parents. I think the way it navigates all these things in the script is extremely well done, and it's another one of these films that's doing a delicate balancing act. Something that actually reminded me of a little bit in that respect was another film that we reviewed on the show a while ago in Miss Juneteenth. Now, the reason I bring that up is because it's another one of these films where, to watch it, it doesn't look like there's necessarily a lot of hard work going on, but in order to balance the different perspectives and still tell a story within that is actually quite, for me anyway, quite skillfully done. So for me, I found it really very good. I don't think it's one of these films where I don't necessarily there's lots of things that I'm sure you could pick out from it as a message or of any other thing, but really at its core, I think it's just quite a well told story. And it does that very deftly, using the relationships between the different members of that family and also some of the folk around them, such as the Paul character played by Will Patton and so on. So yeah, I personally got a lot out of this.
It's strange. The one, if I had to offer, I suppose, any criticism to this film, and I did thoroughly enjoy it, I loved how it's centered on the family. What confused me a little bit is because we have such a focal point about young David and his grandmother, and then on the sidelines we have the conflicts between the husband and wife, the father and mother, about what they're searching for in this move. And I it makes me, it's kind of weird to find out where the sister sort of fits into that. She's sort of a character that kind of, I suppose you could say, is quite a mediator between the relationship between David and his grandmother and between her mother and father, but she doesn't really serve much purpose in the movie other than to, I suppose, establish like a family unit to maybe balance it out. It was one of the things when I was watching it where I was sort of looking for her to have her story and was a bit confused when she didn't really have one. She existed sort of somewhere in between everyone else's. And I think when you're doing a story that is centered on a family unit and their reflection of their kind of migration to this new life, it's strange that her story wouldn't be included. I think that was one of the things that I was a bit disappointed in, but not enough to not keep my attention on everything else that was going on. But it is one of those things that I did notice, which just because it was a little bit strange, to be honest, when I was seeing it. I don't know if anyone else felt that way with that character, or maybe just something that was lingering.
I don't know if I I don't know if I totally agree. I guess she plays this role of someone who gets largely, I mean, you kind of have the younger son who, has kind of the personality and, is grappling with the frustration with, additions to the family. And, she's kind of trying to be the responsible one, the sort of left alone, while the parents work. So I felt that kind of character was kind of strong. I mean, she was always trying to take them to church, and she was always trying to, I don't know. I really did grasp her character. I really did. I kind of very much enjoyed it. It was quite subtle, but I think the whole film is quite subtle. And I think that's kind of the point, the point is, and I think you bringing up Miss Juneteenth, I was thinking about the fact that that film kind of explores multiple characters, and the family, and no one's kind of vilified in a sense, so everyone here is going through a certain, complication, and it isn't about the outside world, like you said. I mean, it is, the outside world is is the getting used to and making it home, but the internal issues are what kind of is driving the story. So in that way, I think, like you said, it's quite lovely. I guess I had heard a lot about this film, like just in the fact that I guess it was a big deal at Sundance, and then there was this recent controversy over, what category it was in the Golden Globes and whatnot, which I'm sure Jim has comments on.
I'm biting my tongue.
Yeah.
I'm biting my tongue.
But I that's one of those things where I wish I hadn't maybe had that information before. Best thing to come out of Sundance. Because maybe I had different expectations. I liked it, but I thought it, like you said, maybe sometimes it was meandering. I don't know if it was meandering as much as it was just a quiet film. It was a quiet film about a family and a story about in the 80s. I quite enjoyed the church scene where they're just bored, and I just thought about the times my parents took me to church, and I wish I had a phone. Not, too bad I grew up. Well, I didn't grow up in the 80s, but still, anyway, so, it was good. It really is good. I don't know if it's the best film I've seen this year, but I enjoyed it.
I kind of agree with Steph's point, and I also see where it's meant to fit in the narrative too, because I think it's got to do with David's heart murmur, and the fact that because he's so unwell, the parents have kind of channeled a lot of their energy into him, and Anne's had to be self-reliant in a way. But that said, the movie does move away from David's perspective at times. It kind of begins with his point of view looking in the rearview mirror, but it does move away from him at moments, and why it didn't move to her as part of those movements, yeah, I can see that that's an omission in the film's emotional structure in a way. I have to say that I've seen it twice now, and on first viewing I really didn't get on with it. I found it really cold and quite jarring in a way that I had to see again to try and tease out the reasons why. And I think it's useful to contrast this and the fact of why I didn't like it with the film, which I feel like it's in some ways similar to in design, which is Lulu Wang's The Farewell, which is a film that I really don't get on with because I think there's nary a good performance in the film, to be quite honest. But it's a film whose design I quite like. Exactly the opposite here, which is the performances are probably one exception, top to bottom, wonderful. And the design I don't really get on with, because the design of the film kind of moves through. I think the first hour is lovely. First hour is full of a lot of the understated touches that we've been talking about so far, and it's full of excellent performances, as I say. I think the standout is Hanye Ree as Monica. I think she's absolutely tremendous. She can hold a close-up like no one else in that film. She has these reserves of anger and frustration and boredom that kind of come in waves, and I think they're so incredibly evoked by the way she kind of shifts her stance, or the way that she kind of her frown begins, or numerous things that she uses in her expressive toolkit that I just think are extraordinary. I think it's the best performance in the film. But what happens after that first hour is things start going downhill for the farming, the prospect of their farming, and once that happens, the film invites this kind of steady decline in terms of the family's emotional security, and then seems as though it's going to sort of swing up and gradually effloresce into feeling again. And I don't feel like it did that in a way, because part of what Lee Isaac Chung's style demands is this variation between long shot and closer shots. And at times he's putting a wee bit too much of a frame on an interaction. So if the performances are wonderful, there are scenes where the performances are kind of like almost subtracted as an element from the scene. For instance, I'm thinking of when Sunya arrives in the house, and they have this scene where she hands to her daughter chilies and anchovies from Korea, and they're like, and she cries because, you know, these are reminders of home, or an old home. And what happens there is that the way that it's staged is that there's this door frame in the way, and it puts too much of a comment on the performances and doesn't actually let them perform, to me. When the performances are the best thing, why take away from your actors in that way? And I'll say that there are also these moments where Jacob's at his kind of lowest ebb, which are in the field at twilight, and they're straight out of Terrence Malick's films. They're kind of low angled shots. Often the camera's kind of like drifted, unmooring and moving, and they serve little to no purpose to me. And there's such a diversion. And the film has quite a few of those little moments where it decides to put too much of a comment on a character for me. So I end up kind of losing out a certain emotional texture that I'm sure everybody else is experiencing, but I don't know. It's also, part of it is because it's kind of gesturing towards a film I really love. And the final card is "To All Our Grandmas," and the fact that there's a grandmother and an adorable kid puts me in mind of Edward Yang's Yi Yi. And as soon as that comparison became alive for me, I thought, oh no, because it's not going to live up to that.
I think I'm gonna agree and disagree with you there, right? Because I think I disagree with the general well, I mean, I say I disagree with generally. Obviously, I can't disagree with how you feel about it, right? But what I can say is I didn't come out with it with the same feeling. I think the thing that you've highlighted with the Malick-like shots, though, when I was talking about the film meandering, that's kind of what I had in my head. I think those are moments where it dilutes the film a little bit for me, if I'm honest. Now for me, it didn't take away, and I take your example about that scene where Sunya first comes into the film. I can see what you're saying. I can't honestly say that got in the way for me, or I can identify other points where it did. I think because for me, it felt like quite a light touch to me. And I struggle to come up with other examples where I feel like that sort of, the way something's been framed or blocked or staged or something has got in the way for me. I can see where you're coming from, but I can't say it had ended up having the same effect on me as it has.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know, just the feeling of being closed in a trailer or something like that. I mean, I maybe sort of agree in that. I also, I think we were just talking about this last film about how scenery was shot and how, the use of, how Scotland was looked at differently. And I wasn't getting anything new. I mean, maybe it's just I'm kind of sick of drone shots, but I wasn't getting anything new about the way Arkansas or, rural America was particularly framed. But that being said, I don't think this film was, the highlight of this film wasn't that for me. It was like you've all eloquently mentioned, performances and that story, and I thought it was particularly sweet, and I was very captivated by it. So watch Minari. It will be on Glasgow Film Festival, and then when is it? Is it coming out shortly thereafter in the UK?
Knows.
Okay, really on a roll today. All right.
Don't worry, I'll bleep myself out there. No, honestly, trying to plan this show, I've given up on looking at release dates. Thank God for film festivals, at least I know somebody's going to see it.
So be sure to check out Minari and let us know what you think at the Glasgow Film Festival.